Hello everybody, part 2 of changing my Rover 45 CV boots. Now this time it's the passenger side. Now I will say one thing when I did the driver's side. I wasn't particularly happy even though I was only replacing the boot. I wasn't especially happy with the universal boot that I had fitted. It took quite a little bit of manoeuvring to get it on. And I'm quite happy with the way it's sitting, but I thought, couldn't I have got a Rover 45 original one? And that crossed my mind a few times. And then I came up with a solution. And the solution is a part of the boot issue and also the outer joint itself. And I thought this would be a really good bit of content for the passenger side. Now, for those of you who do not have access to a cone, the cone tool for the boot is absolutely rubbish. The proper air compressor tool that I have used, which cost me just over £50 for the tool. Not everybody has one, and not everybody can justify buying one just to replace the boots themselves. But there is also a very well-known technique that you do not need any tools for whatsoever, and it is simply bashing the outer joint off the drive shaft in situ, getting it past the snap ring, and then basically putting the new boot straight on, putting the grease in, banging the old joint back on, and hey presto, put the clamps on and you're done. And that is basically the method I'm going to show you today. But the reason I'm going to show you it, it's not as easy as what I've just said. I've made it sound really easy there, and it really isn't. And I'm going to show you that in a second. What I have done is kind of like the first part is to show you how to change the boot, just the boot itself, no more components. But I wasn't entirely happy with the condition of the reluctor rings on the outer joints. Now, I'm going to show you the reluctor rings in a bit, particularly on the passenger side. They're both very rusty. I'm not desperate to change them, but the truth is, it is a common fault on 45s where the reluctor rings that are pressed onto the outer joints, they basically rust and they can crack. And that will send the ABS into an AWOL situation. You'll get a light on the dashboard, it won't work, because the ABS pickup is confused because there's a crack there and it's caused basically the signals to go out of true. So I am thinking of a bit of preventative maintenance by buying a complete brand new outer joint from JR Components. JR are specialists in drive shafts. They are based in Birmingham and they specialise in outer joints. And I will just show you this now. The kit, I should have bought this before I did the driver's side, so I've bought two. So I will go back to the driver's side and just repeat some of what I did off camera. It won't take me long whatsoever. So basically what I did in part one is to show you how to change the boot with a tool. But for me, it was a complete waste of time. So I apologise for that. But this kit comes with the correct Rover 45 CV boot. Why I didn't discover this before, I do not know. But hey, hindsight is a great thing. And the problem with 45s is that with the outer joint, as I say, this reluctor ring, it rusts, it cracks, it is a common fault. And you know something? I don't like the condition of either of them. So we're going to get these off and we're going to change this complete new joint with a brand new snap ring, new clips, new boot, some fresh grease, and I'm going to show you how to do that on the passenger side. So we're going to join Andrew once he's got the suspension off. You know how to do that. Repeat the driver's side, bottom, top ball joint, push the hub through, move it onto a good box, and then we join Andrew. Before we go outside though, this video is very much relevant if you have a situation where your CV boot is not only cracked, it's actually split. That means the grease will have got out, water would have undoubtedly got in, and this is where I would recommend you change the joint for that very reason. Now my joints are good on this car. Water has not got into them. There was no splits in the actual boot itself, but I would imagine realistically with the situation you might be in, if you've got a slip boot, you will have wear on the joint. So I would recommend doing exactly what I've done here. These two joints, by the way, I bought two, there's two of them, okay? And they cost about £15 each, or about £4 delivery. So for the cost of £34, you've got everything. The boots, the joints, the snap rings, the clips. What is there not to like about that? So I think for the cost, it's an absolute no-brainer to change the joints and to prevent the reluctor rings from cracking and leaving you without an ABS on a journey and sending you into a panic. And then, you know, it's all greased up, new boots, it's all been done properly. I do like to do jobs complete. As I said before, with the brake disc noise that I get on the 45, people have asked, why don't I change the brake disc? When I did the calipers and the pads, it makes sense. Absolutely. That is my mindset with doing things. I do things in complete systems. I don't tend to do a little bit and then go away and then have to come back and do a little bit more on the same sort of system. I like to do complete jobs. Is it more expensive? Well, it is at the time, but it's not expensive in the long run. And it depends if you're keeping the car long term or short term. If it's short term, just do little jobs. If it's long term, you want to do complete jobs like this. And I have no doubt that Project Beatrix is going to be with me for a lot longer than I thought. And we come outside in this scorchingly hot day today. It really is absolutely boiling. You join me after I've removed all the bits that I've just explained, and we've got the drive shaft separated from the hub itself and taken the bottom ball joint out. The bottom ball joint seems fine. There's a bit of minor cracking on the boot, but otherwise I am satisfied with that, and that is going to be a right pain because I presume you have to press that out. However, one thing I noticed on taking the top arm out is the top ball joint. Oh yeah, that's not faring so well, and we can see a bit of milky grease in there. So water has definitely got into that, but it feels fine. I mean, these bushes here, they feel fine as well on this wishbone, but I'm most probably going to get a pair of wishbones and replace not just this side but that side as well, because at the end of the day, yes, you can just replace the boot. Some people would prefer to do that, but the truth is I would just replace the whole thing. I suspect that this spring has got to come out with this strut assembly, so it would have to come out with this bolt, and then this would sort of have to be hooked around there and take the whole spring and shock absorber assembly off, and then you can get at this arm. But that's for another day. I don't want to get distracted, but it is another job to be done. That's absolutely fine because rubbers perish. I'm quite satisfied about the rubber on the track rod end. That looks good to me. It looks old, but it looks good. There's no holes. As I say, there's just some minor cracking on the boot down here on this bottom ball joint, so I may consider just to have that pressed out and replaced. But once again, look at the shaft. I mean, if you look inside the drive shaft, I mean, look at this. It's clean. I mean, literally, I didn't even need my my air punch to get that out. It's just a whack with a normal manual punch, and it came out straight away. If this was a Ford, this would all be surface corrosion on this. I'm just amazed about how easy this comes together. This hasn't taken me long, by the way. I think I've started about 20 minutes ago. I mean, the bottom ball joint on this side was a bit harder to break off from the bottom arm, but overall pretty good. The bush here, if I just move this out the way, the bush here, that sort of links onto the bottom of this strut assembly. There's minor cracking, but again, I'd have to have that pressed out because I think these bottom arms are quite expensive, but you can get the bush separately on these, which is fantastic. If it was a Ford, you'd have to go and get a complete arm. But as we can see, we've got the usual cracking here on the CV boot. It's not looking great. It's looking a bit tired. And again, the reluctor ring is looking rusty. And yes, you can bash these off, I suspect, and push a new one on, but this surface is really rusty and I just can't be bothered. So I've got a complete brand new joint, as I've just shown you. It's in there ready to go on. We've got tons and tons of grease. I think I've got a few sachets. I think I didn't use as much for that side as I should have on that universal kit, so I had some left over, but I suspect the other side I'm going to be doing exactly the same. Now, as I said to you before, there is another method of taking this off, but first we've got to get these clamps off and cut through in the usual way. Now, you've seen me cut it off with an angle grinder before, so I will cut back to the next shot. Right, those clips are now
both out the way, and I've just managed to slide it off again. We've got this slightly greeny gunge, but that's kind of the colour it should be. Again, that's the colour you want. You don't want to see milky stuff like that up there. That is evidence of water and grease going together. Now, before I cut this off, the way that this outer joint is held on, remember, we're not using a tool. You haven't got a comb, you haven't got a special tool. What can I do? Well, easy enough, because I'm actually replacing the joint, and with the kit, well, I've got the old snap ring actually. This is the snap ring off a spare car that I had ages ago. Unfortunately, this snap ring doesn't actually fit. You have to get the correct one, which is always why you buy the kit, because the correct size snap ring will fit. And it is really important to buy the right size snap ring for your car, because essentially the snap ring, which sits in here, and it holds this outer joint on this shaft, okay? If you didn't have that snap ring, the two halves, this outer joint would just come off the splines of the drive shaft, and you'd have no drive, because if you ain't got drive to one side, you ain't gonna have drive to the other. And the way of getting it off is essentially banging it off. I mean, literally getting a hammer and tapping on this outer edge here and tapping it this way. You must hold on to the drive shaft, because naturally they're both connected, and that snap ring is holding the two halves together. If you keep hitting this without holding this, it will come out the gearbox, and you're going to be left with a lot of mess to clear up, and some oil that needs replacing, and in the case of CV2 fluid, quite expensive. So you don't want to be doing that. So ideally you hold with one hand and you hit it with a simple lump hammer on this outer circumference, okay? And that is exactly what we're going to do. I hate these jobs. So yes, it looks like the wishbones are going to have to be replaced as well, but that's okay, because I'm expecting some rubber products to need replacing in the suspension, even though I've got to be honest with you, for a suspension that is, you know, coming up to 20 years old next year, that's nothing. I mean, we're talking about rubber products. We're not talking about major cracked springs and rotten arms. I mean, there's just nothing. There's nothing to give me cause of concern about this this car. Just clean that up. Now we could just just leave it like that. It's always good to have some rags when you're doing this, because this gets awfully messy. Just slip the boot off as carefully as you can. Yeah, that's not very nice. And unfortunately, I've discovered that I've ran out of gloves. That's how messy this job is. I've changed God knows how many pairs of gloves. Now, I'd recommend that you get the dirtiest towel possible to cover this up, and we're just going to remove as much grease as possible, because we're going to be applying new grease. So it's worthwhile to actually remove as much of this as possible. And you don't transfer grease to your hammer, and then you're transferring grease to all your tools. This is a job that gets messy very, very easily. In hindsight, that joint actually looks really good. I might keep this as a second-hand spare. Now, as I say, the technique is hold the shaft with one hand, hold it inwards, because you've got the inner joint that will move backwards and forwards, and just give it some sharp taps with the hammer. There we go. It has actually moved. I'll just show you. Right, what's happened here, as you can see, it's now moved. In fact, I can wiggle that off. Maybe not actually, the snap ring is still holding it tight, but it's just, what's happened here is the joint has moved over the snap ring by hitting it in that manner. Sharp hits a couple of times, holding this shaft, and that has moved. You should not see those splines. So when we put the joint back on, the new joint, we should not see any of these splines down here by my finger. Ah, done. It's as easy as that. Oh. That doesn't look bad at all. Just going to give that an overall clean. No, it doesn't look bad at all. I can't see any wear on the ball bearings. Okay, right, we'll put that aside, and I'll just give this shaft a bit of a clean now, because we want all this old grease gone, because we're replacing all the grease. Ooh. Yeah, messy, messy, messy. It's worse when you've run out of gloves. Now, can you see that snap ring there? Now, this snap ring, ideally, it needs to be replaced, because what happens, you see how it's sticking out there at the end? If I just push it, see what I mean? It's sticking out a bit. Now, what happens to snap rings when you actually knock a joint off is they can actually deform, and that is not sitting in. You can get some pliers and try and crush them in like that, but what will usually happen is the joint will struggle to go over that. I've seen people, when they're trying to push new joints on and knock it in with a hammer, you get a screwdriver from this side and push it down as you're banging it in. It's a real faffy job, and this is why they suggest replacing it with a new snap ring, because I can guarantee, in fact, I could probably, sometimes they're that easy to take off. You can take it off with your hands. That's not a good sign. That means the clip is deformed. It needs to sit nice and true in that gap. Otherwise, you're going to have problems putting the new joint back on. And as we put the new joint back on a bit later, we have to snap it over that. It's, again, sharp wax, and it will go over that snap ring, and that snap ring will basically stick into an area that I'm going to show you in a second. And you just keep banging it in until all the splines are not visible. That's when you know the actual outer joint is properly seated on this shaft. But as we can see, getting a new boot on, well, you just slip it over, don't you? I mean, literally, it's as easy as getting a pick over underneath this actual clip and just doing this. I mean, that is going to come out quite easily. Well, he says that, but if I can do it on camera, that proves how easy it is. See, it wants to come off, but it's not quite coming off. Oh, there we go. Come on, just come off. Ah, you bastard. Well, you get the idea. You just got to try and unhook it off as best you can. But that snap ring isn't too bad. I've seen worse. But we just need to replace it. That's the advice given to me, and it's the advice I'd pass to you. Get a new snap ring. Okay, lovely. I would advise just to clean this up. Make sure the splines are really nice and clean. And make sure that this groove is nice and clean so that the actual new snap ring can sit nice and true in the groove. There's no gunk or any excess grease that's stopping it from sitting flush. Just put your fingernail in the groove if you can and just keep going around, and that's done. Now, as you can see in here, you've got the splines on the new joint. Now, the snap ring goes right down here and it clicks in into a groove behind my finger. Once it's clicked in, it's going to take a big sharp hammer to be able to separate the two halves. So it's really difficult, and well, I'm actually glad I'm doing this, because we've got this new joint. I mean, you compared it with the old one. Yeah, just change it. I'm not too faffed. I am going to probably do the other side, but this is just to show you that there are a couple of methods to doing CV boots, but ideally doing this at the same time on a Rover 45 is a really good idea. Right, well, since everything's free, we can just slip the new CV boot, which is the correct one for this car, which I'm really pleased about. Not a universal one, so no cutting is going to be involved. You've just got to kind of shuffle it over the splines. It's still tight, which is a good thing. You want it to be nice and tight. So bit of silicone, push it over, and you're done. Okay, so you kind of know where to stop, because there's a notch at the back here, and you'll pretty much know where to stop, because if you've actually de-rusted your drive shafts all painted in stone chip, very amateurishly or lightly, you will see the mark of where it once sat. And now I've got an open packet of grease. Just squeeze all the grease into here. Okay, we want all this packet in here ready to go on. There you go, nice black gungy grease going absolutely everywhere. There we go, lovely. Okay, just get the rest of it out, make sure all the grease is gone. Yeah, done. Okay, lovely. have a piece of cardboard because it's always preferable. Now that is covered in grease. Okay, just pop some of that in there. There's going to be an overload of grease when you put everything on, but the idea is that you wipe off the excess. This grease, by the way, CV joint grease, is not just to protect the joint, it is also there as a preservative for the rubber. It is designed for that. It's exactly the same grease that you would use for ball joints. I mean, I might pop some extra grease into here because there was a bit of grease that came out the center of this shaft when I put the ball joint split on it. It sort of squeezed it and a little bit came out, so I may just try and inject some grease into that boot. It's always worthwhile to do that. But the next stage now is to get the new snap ring on. Now this CV joint kit comes with quite a few things as well. You've got one big clip, you've got the small clip, got a new hub nut, so I am going to probably do the other side as well because obviously I've got these in the kit. Ideally this is what you do instead of you reusing your old one. You can reuse the old one, but best practice just to crush this seam in, and every so often it just gets weak and you can't really crush it in anymore. But I suspect my originals have never been removed. And this is your new snap ring. Now this one looks far smaller in diameter, and that's because it's not been bowed out by some person trying to hammer it off. Now to get this on is going to be very tricky. I'm not going to do it on camera because it's too frustrating, but basically you have got to be very gentle in prizing this out with your fingers. I wouldn't recommend using tools. Use your bare bone fingers. Get your fingernails dirty. Look at that. Yeah, so you're just getting it over the top and sitting in that groove. Make sure there is actually no excess grease that I've just applied. Ouch. Just around this area, so that you can just thread it on and be very careful. Do not lose control of this spring because it is under a huge amount of pressure, and if you lose this, well, you better find the old one, because if you've thrown that away, you're in trouble. You don't want to lose this, so make sure you've got control of this with your fingers. If you're losing control, get some fingers in there quick, because if that springs out, oh, you could go anywhere. On this sort of a driveway, I might be more fortunate than some people. If you've got a gravel driveway, good luck. You're probably going to need to order a new one. It'd be easier. I have to say, working on this car has been an absolute pleasure so far. Everything is coming out relatively nicely. Not easy. Working on the underside of a car, suspension, is not easy. Basically because of where you are, the amount of dirt that you might experience. Now you see I've just slipped there. Now I've just done this on camera. That's why it's important to control the snap ring, because if you haven't got enough fingers on the snap ring, you're in trouble. Now my hands are quite greasy. That's why it's slipping. I'm afraid the element of grease doesn't really help. But ideally, you just want it in. Come on. Right. The snap ring is now in place. Now you can use actually snap ring pliers. I will advise that you could use that as an option, but my idea is not to use that. Now we're going to go and grease this. We are going to need another sachet, so let's open that out and just more mess, and just get it in. You want that grease all in. Okay, might need to move it around a little bit, but ideally this is what you want. Tons of it. Yeah. You just want it really coated in grease. That's my advice. Don't skimp, go for it. That's the best way about this. Now, we are now in a situation where we can now offer the joint up to the drive shaft. Now, the best way about going about this is, again, hold the drive shaft with one hand. So I suggest your strong hand being the opposite. So if you're right-handed, use your left hand, and vice versa. So weakest hand on the shaft, pushing it in, because otherwise you're going to end up with this sort of movement when you're hammering at one end. I would advise also that you get the old hub nut and put it at the end so you don't damage the threads on the new joint. And we are simply going to tap this whole joint over there. Now you've got to get the splines lined up. I can't actually see it because I've put too much grease in, but you'll know where it is. If it's nice and straight, it will go nicely on, and then you'll feel it spline up just to these tiny little splines at the front, and then basically you just tap it on. And I'll just do that on camera so you can all see how hard it is. Right, lined up. It's literally linked up. I can't twist. Hear that? This joint is now splined. Now, all I'm going to do is tap. Oh, it's gone on. There you go. That's how easy it is. It has now gone over the snap ring. I didn't even need to... Do you know what? I didn't even need to put my left hand on it. There was that much of tap. You just need to give it hard taps and it's gone on. In fact, it's actually gone on fully. I don't think there's anything more to give. Just... That's it. Done. And as we can see, I cannot see any of the splines down there, which means that this joint is now firmly on. That's how easy it was to do, and that's how easy it is with a new snap ring. The old snap ring may have given a fight. I may have had to have put a screwdriver on the other side to push it down. They can be a bit of a pain, but this is how you replace a CV boot, by taking the joint off. So this is your second option, and it's really not intimidating. I know when people say, oh, I don't want to take the joint off, it's not rocket science, I can assure you. And you will, honestly, that's not going to fall off now. These two sides, the drive shaft and the outer joint, they're not going to separate now. That's clicked in. That is literally snapped in, and there's no chance that that's coming back out unless I smack it off with a hammer like I did with the old one. So don't worry about it. You're not going to lose drive now. That is fully on. Now, all you gotta do is tidy up and put this boot on. That's it, and all you need to do is maneuver it into position. Now, because this is a copy of the originals, and a very good copy, it literally stops here, and that's how far away from the reluctor ring the boot should actually sit. You just push it to this point here, and you just wipe off the excess that has just squirted out. I've just put a little bit more grease in from that sachet. It's now empty, that. Oh God, it's so hot. I keep complaining about the weather, but when you're working on your car, one, it's not very nice weather to work on your car. It isn't. I prefer it to be cold, ironically, when I'm working on my car, because I get very hot when I work on my car. And plus, I'd rather want to be going to a show on a day like this, rather than dealing with this, and I'm going to deal with that, you know. Anyway, this is spectacularly nice now to look at. Look at that. And probably one of the worst, rustiest areas of the car replaced. Now it's a question of getting the boot clamps back on, and to be honest with you, this is where I'm going to leave the episode. You've seen me do it on that side. I am merely going to put the new clamp there, the new clamp there, spline it back in, bottom ball joint, top ball joint, put the hub nut back on, put a fresh hub nut on and crush it once I've whacked it up with the gun, because torquing it up I can do, but to a limit. And that's it. That is literally it, guys. This is the second method of changing the boots. It's not hard. It's a relatively easy job, but you have to use a new snap ring. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. You take care, guys. I will see you very soon, and no doubt I will see you very soon taking this thing off. Thank you, Beatrix, as usual. Have a lovely day.